Hello! You have reached the bottom rung of the podcast world. Currently, all other podcasts are busy. Our host, Jason Morrison, will be with you shortly. To acknowledge that you will never get the next 15 to 20 minutes of your life back, please continue after the tone. Thank you for choosing Have You Read This Podcast? Have a great day.
An HBO documentary recently popped up on my radar, and it is The Truth versus Alex Jones. And honestly, this is something that would not be a show that I would probably ever have any interest in watching or really know that much about until I started reading on a more regular basis. And that's when I still only had just a vague idea of who Alex Jones was. And that vague idea wasn't really enough to tell me too many interesting things about the guy. And then I read Sandy Hook by Elizabeth Williamson. I touched on this book briefly back in episode 8, where I mentioned some of the best audiobooks I had listened to up until that point. And I've got to say that I'm a little embarrassed to admit that the main reason I sought out Sandy Hook to read in the first place was that my expectations for it was that I was going to find another book that was just like what Dave Cullen had written in Columbine. I thought this book would give details and insight into what led up to the event, what happened during the event, specifically a very detailed timeline and even the aftermath. And, I even looked at the cover of the book and I found the word Sandy Hook across the front, large and bold, but somehow missed the tagline underneath that said, "An American Tragedy and the Battle for Truth." I think I had just zeroed in on Sandy Hook, American Tragedy, and I was likening that to Columbine. And that's pretty much why I sought this book out. And this book still very much is an investigative look into the Sandy Hook tragedy, but it was part of the event that I had zero idea that had really happened, at least not to the degree that it actually happened. Author Elizabeth Williamson was said to have spent hundreds of hours researching and interviewing those involved with Sandy Hook to put this book together. She had access that a lot of people apparently didn't have. And I've even found several mentions of her online where she's referred to as an expert on this topic. The book covers what happened after Sandy Hook, not necessarily before. Now, it doesn't delve too far into the mind of the person responsible for what happened. I'm not going to mention this guy's name. You can look it up if you already don't know. And at least not like Dave Cullen's Columbine book did. This one didn't go into the minds of the people responsible. It does, however, take a pretty deep dive into what happened after the event. Specifically covers how parents of murdered children had to defend themselves against conspiracy theorists. You want to find out just how insane people can really be, then this book is a great start. There is a ton of content about Alex Jones and InfoWars, most of which was relatively new to me, as I'd never really bothered to learn anything about this guy. And if I'm being honest, this book was enough for me. I really don't need to know any more about him. And in fact, I have zero desire to follow anything that this guy puts out. Now, the audiobook was great for two reasons. First, the information is incredible and it's presented so well. Clearly, Williamson was in the trenches digging up this information, and I have no idea what it would be like to dedicate yourself to researching a single topic like this, much less spending the time to interview people, to collect all of this information, and then to somehow condense it into a book. She probably could have easily written several books about this one topic. Secondly, the audiobook narration was perfect. The book was narrated by Rebecca Lohman and Elizabeth Williamson. It was read with concern and it was read with seriousness, warranted by the topic. There's not a single thing that I would change about the audiobook. And there's a part of me that honestly feels kind of guilty of trying to judge a book like this because of such a weighty and serious topic and trying to critique how it was read to an audiobook. But if you've listened to any audiobook, regardless of the topic, you know whoever is reading the thing, if they do a terrible job, it can shift your perception of this book, whether it's good or bad. Fast forward to early December 2023, and in my news feed, I see that Elon Musk, the current owner of Twitter or Twitter X, I don't know even what it's called now, he shared a poll asking if users felt that Alex Jones should have his account reinstated. The poll received nearly 2 million votes, and just a touch over 70% of the people that voted said yes. So Elon made it happen. And that was the day that I logged out of Twitter. And I'm sure somebody out there will say, "Oh, I didn't know you were against free speech." Because that's how it seems to go with the type of audience that this Alex Jones guy draws. In the HBO documentary that I'll talk about in a second, one of the parents even discusses this. She mentions how you just can't win. Everything is a conspiracy. Everything to them is the government trying to control the population to destroy America. They're somehow the only ones who are aware of the truth. Or we want a death certificate. Here's the death certificate. Oh, that was forged. And it just goes on and on and on to where you realize that there is no ending. So do I support free speech? Well, yeah, obviously. If Westboro Baptist Church wants to schedule a protest or whatever it is that they do with those terrible signs, and they aren't breaking any laws, that speech is protected. But it doesn't mean that I have to intentionally place myself in the middle of it. And I guess that's kind of how I felt with Twitter. I no longer wanted to be in the same space with Alex Jones. If 70% of 2 million people voted to have him back and they feel that that's free speech, that doesn't mean that I have to be around to listen to it. Anyway, back to the book for a few minutes. So on December 14th, 2012, a gunman killed 20 first graders and 6 educators at Sandy Hook Elementary School in Connecticut. It was proven in court that Alex Jones took a false narrative about this event. He claimed it was false. He claimed that some of these parents who lost children were actors. He claimed that some of these children were alive and well somewhere. He claimed it was scripted and that this was an attempt for the government to come get everyone's guns. The entire community of 30,000 people there were somehow all involved in cooperating in this entire thing. And it honestly just kind of makes me sick to my stomach to think about it. There was a part of the documentary where a parent is being interviewed and she describes a time when she had been traveling and she was thousands of miles from home and someone recognized her and harassed her, saying she was part of this hoax. And one of the questions that came out of that was, how much content does someone have to take in before they recognize someone thousands of miles away and feels comfortable attacking them? I have read a lot of nonfiction. I've watched a lot of documentaries, and a lot of the people involved in these things, if I saw them at Walmart down the street, I don't know if I would recognize them, much less thousands of miles away. That's mind-blowing to me, what somebody has to consume and how much of it in order to recognize someone like this. I could not identify any parent or surviving member of any family or anything like that who's been involved in any of these true crime books or tragedies that I've read. I just have not delved that far into it and consumed it to that degree where their face is instantly recognizable no matter where in the U.S. I am. So the book synopsis goes on to say this, and I thought this was worth pointing out.
Enabled by Facebook, YouTube, and other social media companies' failure to curb harmful content, the conspiracists' questions grew into suspicion. Suspicion grew into demands for more proof, and unanswered demands turned into rage. This pattern of denial and attack would come to characterize some Americans' response to almost every major event, from mass shootings to the coronavirus pandemic, to the 2020 presidential election, in which President Trump's false claims of a rigged result prompted the January 6, 2021 assault on a bastion of democracy, the U.S. Capitol.
Okay, so do I believe the government keeps things from citizens? Absolutely. Do I believe that there are cover-ups that have happened and will continue to happen? Most definitely. Do I believe our government has lied to us? Oh, yes, most definitely. However, those doubts don't mean that it's now my turn to attack every single thing that happens and assume that every single thing is somehow a government conspiracy. For those of you who are not into nonfiction, I would urge you to at least listen to this. You should be able to find this book on Libby through your library if you don't want to spend money on the audiobook. But this is an important book, and the events are important, and remembering the truth is important. Punishing those who spread lies for profit is important. Now, having said all of that, I turned on the HBO documentary the other night, fully expecting to see an entire series. And I was pretty shocked that it wasn't. One of the reasons I find reading nonfiction so fascinating is that with some of these more recent accounts and events that's taken place, there's so much available on YouTube, allowing me to put visuals with what I've read. And I think that's probably the main reason that I went into this. I already had gotten way more of the story from the book than the documentary went into, but I wanted to see the people. I wanted to see the courtroom discussions and hear some of these interviews. The documentary was equally sad and frustrating. I found myself at times wanting to cry, listening to these parents, or wanting to go full on Morgan Wallen and throw a chair because I was so angry. I also desperately wanted this to be a series so that more information could be made available, especially the interviews with the parents explaining what they went through. The documentary doesn't really touch on just how severely these poor people were attacked. It's insane. Williamson's book speaks at length with one of these families and explains how these people just weren't harassed. They were stalked. They had to move. And if I'm speaking correctly here, one of them even had to change their name. Some parents in the documentary testified how they received threats of people claiming they were going to urinate on these kids' graves. One of the mothers said she was threatened with rape. Some of them had been threatened that they were going to dig the graves up because there's nothing there. That's just insane to me. The documentary goes on to show Scarlett Lewis testifying, and even on that day, while this trial was happening, Alex Jones went on a show insulting her ex-husband, saying he was slow and appeared to have autism. And I found an article on his website where he talks about how Lewis approached him during the break and gave him water and some cough drops. And the article says that this interaction was cordial. And you should really watch this documentary and see how that actually played out, because if you just read that article, that'd be the impression you would get, right? But that's not what happened entirely. Yes, she brought him water and cough drops, and they did have an interaction, but it wasn't entirely cordial, and it kind of had to be separated there towards the end of it. But, interesting how that part wasn't in the article. So if something like that could be lied about, what else could be lied about? And that seems to be the playbook here. All the while, the Jones defense team is attempting to distance themselves from the fact that this guy sells supplements, and the more controversial content he shares, the more spikes in viewership he sees, translating to higher sales. Just want to point out that when I did go on his site to look up something, one of the first things I was hit with was a big, 30, 40% off one of whatever he sells. This giant ad that took up the whole screen. So clearly it's not just, I'm just trying to serve the American public. This guy's trying to make money, plain and simple. I wish the documentary had gone into more details about some of the people associated with InfoWars, at least as much detail as the book did. For example, this Wolfgang Halbig character, who was part of the group of people who spent years going after families at Sandy Hook, he was arrested in 2017. And I found this from a Florida Times Union article. Quote, Halbig allegedly accessed a copy of Posner's TransUnion background check report and emailed it to the FBI and other authorities, claiming Posner had been using a dead woman's Social Security number illegally, according to police, end quote. And this guy was arrested. I just feel like, given what happened at Sandy Hook, there's so many different rabbit holes you can find yourself going down. And just today, I wound up looking at what happened to one of the parents who was involved in the lawsuit. But I was actually happy to find that she'd used her voice to not only write a book of her own, but she'd also started a nonprofit organization. So my homework for you is to take the time to either read Sandy Hook or at least listen to the audiobook version. And then I want you to go watch the HBO documentary after that and make up your own minds. Until next time.
Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Have You Read This? If you made it all the way to this point, you probably are ready for something with alcohol in it, or a nap, or both. But before you pass out in the doorway of your bathroom, it would mean a whole lot if you could leave a 5-star review